Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts with hosts Margaret Pickoff and Sandy Feather.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and on each episode, I'm joined by my colleagues on the green industry team as co-hosts. On today's episode, my co-host is Sandy Feather. Hello, Sandy.
Hey, how are you doing, Margaret?
I'm doing well. So glad to have you on today. For today's episode, we will be joined by our colleague at Penn State Extension, Emelie Swackhamer. But before we get to our interview with Emelie, we'll start out with a little check-in about what we're seeing in the field or working on at this time of year. This is early June when we're recording this. So Sandy, you are out in the Pittsburgh area. What's going on out there?
Well, it's hot and humid, and we are expecting severe storms this afternoon. We'll see if that materializes because, you know, the weather people get everybody all agog about storms, and we've had a few. We've actually had some tornadoes not far from my house, to be honest with you, which is a little crazy. Did a lot of damage at the Pittsburgh Zoo.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's scary. My sister lives in Washington County, just south of Pittsburgh, and her neighborhood experienced a tornado a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if that's something that you're used to, or if this is
not really. It's I mean, over the years, there have been the odd tornado, but we've had three episodes of tornadoes in probably a 6 to 8 week period. That's been a little interesting.
Wow.
And the tornadoes can stay in the Midwest. I'm sorry for the people in the Midwest, but I'm not excited about having them more frequent around here.
Yeah. Well, I think as a general trend, they've gotten more frequent on the eastern side of Pennsylvania too. So yeah, that's alarming and something, you know, we might be looking at more in the future.
Yeah. Well, they're saying climate change is driving these. And last night, I think in Uniontown, which is south of me, probably I think they probably are right before you go into West Virginia. They had flooding. They had a cloudburst and there was flooding in Uniontown. So it's, you know, storms are definitely getting more menacing.
Wow.
As the case may be. But aside from that, you know, people are planting their gardens and stuff. I have a friend who lives in Somerset County who had to go out and cover her crops earlier this week. They had a frost.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. She was like, oh my gosh, my tomato plants.
Yeah, wow, that's it's a bit unpredictable. Yeah, we've had a very warm spring here in the Philly area. They worked with some cut flower growers, and I know that a lot of their spring crops bloomed early. I know that happened last year as well, and it's tough because the timing, you know, farmers plant these crops to be able to provide for certain dates, Mother's Day, you know, Father's Day,
Valentine's Day,
big holidays. And so it's tough when all of your lilacs bloom a week before they're supposed to, or your peonies or what have you. So we're all kind of adjusting to, it's hard because we're still figuring out what the pattern is. You know, it seems it seems a little unpredictable, and it's hard to plan around. So yeah, we'll hang in there, and
you too.
know, we'll do our best. So today we're excited to welcome onto the show one of our colleagues and dear friends, Emelie Swackhamer, who's a fellow horticulture extension educator for Penn State Extension. She's based in Montgomery County, which is in my area in Southeast Pennsylvania, and has a degree from Penn State and a master's from NC State. And so we are delighted to welcome you on, Emelie. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, so we'll start out like we always do, even though, we have a good idea of what it's like to be a horticulture extension educator. But can you talk a little bit about your job specifically in Montgomery County and what sorts of things you work on day to day?
Sure. Yeah, so I've worked for Penn State Extension for a long time, and I consider myself a generalist. So I try to answer any questions that come my way and help people. And I feel very fortunate to have a job that allows me to do that. I learn something from everybody, every question that I get. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try to direct them to somebody who does. So my background is in plant science and plant pathology, but I've done a lot of cross training with insect problems. I'm interested in diagnosis of plant problems, management options. I'm always looking at the applied side of things. I'm a very practical person, so I want to give people practical but research-based answers or options. And I have done a lot of cross training in spotted lanternfly. People might know my name associated with that invasive insect. And that's been a really interesting experience to see spotted lanternfly invade Pennsylvania and watch the educational effort unfold and work with the researchers. So I've done a little bit of everything. I've done a bit of work in vegetable production early on. I've worked with the organic community, but I teach pesticide credits. So, I consider myself a generalist.
Yeah, I would agree that that's a very good way to learn a lot of topics is to tackle whatever question you're presented with, and I've learned how to, I've seen you do that, and that's been very inspiring to me as an educator as well. I think it's a good way to respond to the types of questions that we get, which aren't always strictly within our areas of expertise. I'm not going to dwell too much on spotted lanternfly because you have talked a lot about spotted lanternfly in the last number of years and have spent a lot of time in that world. But you mentioned contributing to this effort to get the word out about this insect that we has touched everyone's lives in Pennsylvania, I think, at this point. And just so, can you say a few words about what that has been like to kind of be on the forefront of not only taking the science and trying to get that out to people, but also responding to people's very possibly emotional reactions to there being thousands of these unfamiliar insects around them causing havoc, and how to quell some of the panic going on, and things coming out from the media. What has it been like to kind of be a part of that as an extension educator?
Yeah, it's been like living in the middle of a firestorm for a couple years. And at the same time that all that was going on around me, I was still trying to maintain all the programming that I do, my conferences and my workshops that I offer on other topics. But all of a sudden here we had a new insect that we had very little information about, and there was tremendous interest in it. Like you said, it has affected everybody's lives, certainly in the infested areas, but really everybody in Pennsylvania hopefully has heard about it. And it's interesting to try to get information out to the public in these days, because everybody has different media sources, and some people are using online sources. Some people are still following the traditional media. Some people are just talking to their friends, and other people don't want to use technology. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to try to cover as many bases as we can and have, good information going out there. There's been a lot of misinformation about spotted lanternfly, and I think some of that has been fueled online. Mm-hmm. So, the one that we've worked very hard on is home remedies, You see on the internet that people will say, you can spray whatever you have under your sink or in your garage, and that will kill spotted lanternflies. And no doubt these products will kill them, but these are not labeled as insecticides, so it's not really legal. It's not safe for plants, or you don't really know. If you read the labels of some household products, they're not non-toxic. They're not inert. I had people spraying trees with kerosene to kill the lanternflies, and kerosine's not good for trees.
And
smelling kerosene's not good for people.
I think a lot of times when I read these home remedies, I think they're going to do more damage to your plant than the lanternflies are going to do.
Yeah, and it just seems to be like that's the mindset of a lot of people, that if it's in your household or in your garage, it has to be safe, because why else would they let a homeowner have access to it? But we had people spraying bleach, and bleach is very toxic, and you don't want to inhale the fumes of bleach. So I'd much rather see people use labeled pesticides, things like insecticidal soap that is, has an EPA insecticide label. That was very interesting with lanternfly. That was one of the big public messages that we worked very hard to get out there. And I think we were successful to some degree, but we certainly haven't reached everybody. So if you're listening to this podcast, you can tell, your friends and neighbors that they should only use labeled pesticides according to the label, because that's the safer way to go.
And there's
and
a lot of really good,
to me, I think some of the chemical companies have kind of hopped on this bandwagon. I was at either a Lowe's or a Home Depot over the weekend, and they had spotted lanternfly killer. And it was a synthetic pyrethroid. I'm sure it's going to work, but I was just like, it'll kill more than spotted lanternflies, unfortunately.
Yeah, it sure will. Yeah. And we've seen a lot of that in our area too. And, that's our capitalistic society where people are seeing an opportunity, and it's good to bring new products to the market. But we've had a lot of need for pesticide safety education around the issue of spotted lanternfly, and I've spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah.
I think, also just being in the middle of all of the media interest and the interest from public officials, who sometimes understand a lot about biology and maybe insects, but sometimes don't. So you have to educate them as well. And every public official I've worked with was engaging and interesting, and really wanted to learn. And then they would provide information to their constituents. So that was a unique opportunity for me to have these kind of bigger ways of getting information out to the public.
Yeah, I think we as Extension are kind of positioned uniquely between the science and the the practical world of human beings. And I know we've talked about this before, research tends to focus on, well, let's figure out the biology, let's figure out how they reproduce, let's figure out, where they came from, all this stuff. And sometimes we're on the other end being like, we need to tell people not to spray bleach on these things, and I think that's a huge part of it too. When these invasive and otherwise, aggressively spreading insects and diseases and other pests kind of enter into a new geographic area. And I think that's a good segue into the kind of the meat of what we wanted to talk to you about today, which is another emerging invasive issue that impacts a lot some of our most prized native trees in our region, which is beech leaf disease. And so I wanted to kind of start out by talking about beech trees in general. What species do we have around us? What's so great about them? Why are they so important? And to kind of to set the stage for why beech leaf disease is such a big issue. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about beech trees? Let's talk about beeches.
Yeah, so beech trees are my favorite trees. And they've been for a long, long time. If you would have asked me 15, 20 years ago, what is my favorite tree? I probably would have said beech. They're beautiful. We have a lot of American beech in our forests where I live in Berks County. They're often in like beech oak forests here on the ridges. They have beautiful gray bark. These are Native American trees. And they hold their youngest leaves through the winter. So like the young sprouts will have these kind of golden looking leaves that blow in the breeze in the winter. And they're just so beautiful. I love them. They're also important trees in the natural ecosystem. In our forests, they make nuts. So beech nuts are really tiny, but that means that they can be food for a lot of creatures. There are birds that eat them, turkeys, blue jays, but deer will forage on beech nuts, and it's a mast crop. So they're important to a lot of creatures. They provide shade. They promote water quality in these areas. They hold soil in place with their root systems, and they're really important. Our Native American beech. The beech leaf disease will affect those, but they will also affect the European types of beeches and also the Japanese and Oriental beech, which are a little less common in our area. But a lot of people have the European beech. Mm-hmm. So the European beech trees are usually found in landscapes where they're focal point trees. I know of a lot of them in relation to like college campuses. They're often around their administration building. Penn State is the old Maine building, but I know there were two big old European beech trees at Moravian College, and I'm not sure if those trees are still there. I was out to see them about 15 years ago with one of the landscapers. They have them on the campus of Muhlenberg. A lot of estate properties have these beech trees, and there are arborists that care for them, and beech trees have other problems. Mm-hmm. So, these are important trees in those landscapes, but they're very different than the American beech that, we see in these forested areas. And oftentimes the European beech have resources around them for arborists to care for them. The American beech tree forests, people love them, but they don't have the resources to, do a lot of management options for any of these problems in those settings. So they're very diverse in a way.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, that based on where they're grown and kind of the monetary resources and the number of people looking at them every single day, they would receive a different level of care than the European beeches. And you had mentioned there are other issues that affect beech trees besides beech leaf disease that have been around for a little while. Could you talk about some of those?
Sure. For these estate trees, I often see Phytophthora canker on them, and they get like a sunken area on the trunk, and it often is kind of wet looking. And there are some management options to sort of delay the development of that can help. So Phytophthora canker, but we also have bagworm. The beech leaf disease, or the beech bark disease, is caused by a fungus that's transmitted by a scale insect. So it's kind of two things at the same time. And that causes cankers on the trunks and can kill the whole tree. And then beech is a colony forming tree, so it can sprout up from the root system. So sometimes you'll see killed older trees that have had the beech bark disease, and then you get these sprouts coming up. So those are probably the most common. We have woolly beech aphid, which is an aphid that shows up in the spring on the undersides of the leaves and makes it look kind of woolly or cottony underneath. They're usually not a long-term problem. Usually the beneficial insects will find them and kind of control them eventually on their own. And there's another aphid that feeds on beech that they affectionately refer to as the boogie woogie aphid. If anybody wants to just Google boogie woogie aphid, there's great YouTube videos about it. And these aphids also secrete like this white fluffy stuff from their bodies, and you find them on the branches and the leaves. And when they feel threatened, they'll like pulsate in unison. And it's just really wild to see it. So that's another one. It's not considered a major pest, but they're annoying. They can make honeydew and sooty mold problems. And they actually, if you get them on your skin, they can like pinch a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So it's not something you want to grab them and pick them up.
Well, they certainly grab your attention when you see them.
Yeah, mostly you just want to look at them and take videos.
White, and then they all move in unison. So it's,
Yeah.
I guess they think they're scaring you away.
Yeah, so we've had all these things on beech trees for a while, but now we're seeing beech leaf disease, and across the state. We've seen it in the Erie area first for a while, a couple of years, but it's moved across the state. And then the first time
67 counties now.
It is, yeah. And the first time I saw it was in 2022. A friend of mine who's a retired horticulturalist from Temple Ambler campus asked me to come see the beeches in his township nearby. And I got into that stand of beech. I've been in these settings all my life, and just to look up into the canopy and see the symptoms and how sparse the trees looked. It was one of those moments where I was just like, oh no, like, oh, you hope these things never come to your neighborhood. And that was the moment for me where I was like, oh, it's here.
Yeah.
And then being in plant pathology, I, have tried to learn as much as I could about it.
So can you talk about what it was that you saw? Like, what are those major symptoms that help you identify beech leaf disease?
Yeah, so I think the easiest one to describe is the banding, the interveinal banding on the leaves. So when the tree has leaves during the season, you look up at the canopy, and with the light against the leaves, you can see this dark green banding. So, and it's bound by the veins. So the leaves look almost striped, and it's like dark green and lighter green areas. And that's what I'm seeing in my immediate neighborhood, where this is the first year I've been able to say we have beech leaf disease. So early on in the infection, that's what you first notice. Now, as the years go on, the leaves will continue to have that banding. The leaves get thick in that banded area, and they actually call it a gall because the cells are like proliferating. And that's where the nematodes are feeding in the summer. So the leaves get thick, but they'll also curl under, and you get like this cupping effect, and you'll get defoliation. And if it, as it progresses, you get bud death and twig death. And I think in essence, the trees kind of starve to death because they can't photosynthesize because their canopy is so compromised. So I was up in the Poconos 2 weeks ago, south of Scranton. My son lives up there, and they've had beech leaf disease in their neighborhood for a couple of years. And the trees are looking, the foliage is really sparse, and the trees, I think, are starting to really suffer from it. So it can kill beech trees in a few years, and younger trees faster than older trees is what they've noticed. So we really don't know a lot about the timetable yet, but it does not look good for beech. It does not look good for beech trees right now. I don't think the prognosis is very good.
And it's one thing because they, particularly, some of the people doing some applied research are coming up with ways to treat it in the landscape, but that's not going to be practical for the woods.
Right. Right. So, and we're learning about management methods, and it takes a long time to really come up with research about, the information you need to make good decisions and recommendations for management decisions. And this is a tree disease, so you can't do the test in a lab somewhere. You have to test it in the field, and you can only get data from one growing season at a time. And people are working on that, but we have some things that we can suggest right now, but we don't really know what the best recommendation is. And for wide areas, we don't have anything that's cost effective. So of course, you always hope that nature somehow finds a way, like some beneficial organism will, start to use the nematode that causes the disease as a food source and provide some sort of natural control. We're also interested in host resistance. So every beech tree, beech trees can grow from seed, and from every seed, a beech tree would have different genetics. So if you see beech trees that are, affected in one area, but there's one tree or one clonal stand of trees that is not affected, that could be really significant. And I think at the moment, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Service foresters would be the place that I would try to send that information.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not aware if there's any, reporting site for it. Are you, either of you?
I think DCNR, I don't know if they're still tracking reports, because now that it's in all 67 counties, but it's not, it's like the spotted lanternfly. They're not everywhere in that county,
Right. But I'm not aware of anybody that's collecting information about trees.
Resistance. Yeah.
So I would tell the DCNR service forester and hope that it gets to the right people.
Mm-hmm.
Potentially we could find some resistance within our American beech.
That would be the best, at least as far as hope for the woods, Yeah,
and that's
I know
the kind of stuff you hope for. Yeah.
That's the approach they're taking with the hemlock woolly adelgid. They've identified some, I heard them called bulletproof hemlocks in the Delaware Water Gap. And
yeah, I've heard about those.
Yeah. So that would be
similar efforts, happening with American chestnuts and ash trees and with emerald ash borer. And unfortunately, it seems like it's a process that takes a long time, to find resistant trees, and then actually have to look at the genetic information and figure out which genes are responsible for the resistance, and it's lots of years of breeding, and there's something called back crossing, which I just learned about. And unfortunately it seems like this disease is spreading quite rapidly. And from my understanding, they're not. So I did want to touch on the nematode portion of this, because from what I understand, this is rare for a tree disease to be transmitted by a nematode, a foliar nematode. And so can we talk a little bit about, what do we know about the role that the nematodes are playing? And do we understand how they're moving? Are there any theories about, how this disease is spreading via these nematodes?
Yeah, it's a good question. So nematodes are small, unsegmented roundworms, and they're one of the most prolific, abundant types of creatures on the face of the earth. So most nematodes are free living, and they live in the soil, and they feed on bacteria, and there's nematodes in your compost pile. They're part of the microflora, fauna of the soil, and most of them don't do any harm that we know of. There are some nematodes, though, that cause plant disease. And most of the ones that cause plant disease, because they need to live in moist conditions, they affect the roots of the plants. They can't live most of the time, in other parts of the plants. So we have root knot nematode, we have cyst nematode, and they cause, the roots of plants to become disfigured. Nematode feeding wounds the roots, and then fungi can get in and cause root rots and things like that. So we usually think about nematodes in relation to cropping systems, and even in relation to population numbers. And we'll do nematode bioassays of soil to figure out what kind of nematodes are there and how many there are and what kind they are, to decide if it's a bad situation or if it's okay. This one's unusual. This is in, the foliage of a tree, and unusual for a nematode to cause a severe problem on the upward parts of a tree. The only other one I can think of is pine wilt nematode. So I don't think we know a whole
But
lot
I don't
about that one either.
But I don't think they're foliar nematodes, are they?
Well, they get into the needles, yeah.
Okay,
The
okay.
needles and the twigs, as I understand it. But it's kind of an unusual thing. I don't really encounter it much.
Yeah, because we see
Um,
foliar nematodes in things like ferns and hostas and
yeah,
different herbaceous plants. It's really not uncommon, but
yeah.
for
And
a
they cause
tree,
like almost like it looks like a leaf miner or something.
right? But for a
Not
tree, it's just
severe,
very bizarre. Like,
yeah, death
how
of
are
a
these
tree.
foliar nematodes getting way up in a big mature beech tree?
Yeah. So how do they get there? Well, they move around, and they're fragile little creatures, so they have to have water around the bodies. The eggs are a little tougher, but we think birds can move them on their feet. So if they land where there's nematodes and it's wet, the little birds can transfer them around. Mikhail Cantor at Penn State has shown that some leaf-feeding caterpillars have
Wow.
eaten leaves with the beech leaf disease nematodes, and their frass contains live nematodes.
Oh,
So
wow.
that, like caterpillars could maybe
Yeah.
move them around. Certainly wind-driven rain could
Mhm.
move them. So, like wet nematodes present might make outbreaks happen. But in general, it just seems like they're finding a way and they're spreading.
Mm.
So I don't think we have any hope of environmental conditions of really slowing it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
One of the early webinars I went to about beech leaf disease was talking about how it does seem to be adjacent to large bodies of water like the Great Lakes and the Atlantic
Uh-huh.
Ocean. And that could, storms and stuff could probably be,
Storms or humidity, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah, and this just illustrates the need for research. We need
absolutely.
researchers that are looking into these very specific questions that, seem very specific, but could have implications for practical management or prediction.
Right.
And there's endless need for this kind of research out there. And it's kind of exciting to just know that, we can find things out, all the methods that we have, just different testing methods all the time.
It was
Yeah.
interesting. Early on, like not long after beech leaf disease was identified, and I think at the time we didn't know what caused it. I was having a conversation with Nancy Taylor from Ohio State, and she said, "We're not stumped. We're underfunded.
Mm-hmm.
We need money to do the research."
Yeah, and how to prioritize what you spend your time and energy researching. That's always, a discussion I think that should be had between researchers and practitioners.
Right.
So extension helps with that, the conduit of information, like what do the tree care professionals need to know, and how can we try to get that kind of research done?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering in a more big picture way, because it seems clear that these invasive pests, insects, diseases are going to keep presenting these major stressors to our native trees and other plants. But I think the emerald ash borer, the chestnut blight from a long time ago, spotted lanternfly hasn't been shown, I don't think, to really kill any mature shade trees that I know of, although they're a stressor. But these invasive pests and diseases, they're going to keep coming. And I was at a conference last week at Morris Arboretum, and someone asked a really good question. It's like, we talk a lot about how to manage them, how to contain them, how to do breeding, but like, what can we do to address the problem at its root? Is that possible? Or are we kind of just responding to them in the best way we can as they inevitably show up and start wreaking havoc. And it's the same with invasive plants in our natural ecosystems. We can't stop the flow of trade. We can't stop
No.
people from moving, across state borders, or, moving firewood from one place to another, although we can try. But, I'm not necessarily asking for an answer here. I find it an interesting thing to think about, putting it into context and thinking about the bigger picture. Is like, are we just kind of looking at a future where we just continue to have these so-called invasions of these really disruptive pests and diseases, and what can we do to better prepare ourselves?
Yeah, and I'm glad you're not asking me for an answer, because I don't think there is one. But
close all the ports.
I think we can rest assured that we're going to keep moving things around the globe. I remember when I was a new extension educator years ago, one of our Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture officials who really, knew a lot about this. And that was, back in the 90s, like when we were just starting to really talk about invasive problems. He had this, he described this scenario that he thought we were heading toward globally, where insects and diseases of plants, but also plants and like everything, would no longer be confined to continents or geographical regions, that everything would kind of spread out around the globe, like through the latitudes. So, like everything in the temperate areas of the northern hemisphere would be pretty much the same around the whole globe, and so on.
Oh, wow.
And that to me was a real eye-opener, back when I was new, like, wow, here's a person who really knows a lot about this, and that's his prediction. And of course you want to say, oh, it couldn't possibly happen, but I think we're seeing it happen. And, I think we just need to keep trying to educate people about not moving things around. So, as tempting as it is to share plants, or, like move your boating equipment, and, there's all kinds of educational efforts to warn people about moving objects that might have invasive species on them, and just keep educating people as best we can. And then, the other end of it is letting nature see what nature does with what we have created. And we don't really know what nature is going to do with beech leaf disease. Hopefully there's some resistance. Hopefully there's some predators and parasitoids or natural enemies that can help and see what happens. But when we don't have nature fixing the problem for us, we wind up with things like the ash tree catastrophe, right, which has been, just devastating and a huge expense to our environment and to our pocketbooks.
And it keeps moving west. It's not, I mean, Pennsylvania's pretty well done, with the exception of those lingering ash trees, but it's still going on. Like it becomes a new invasive in different states to this day, which when you think about
I think it's going to continue.
It just keeps going.
I'll add a story that maybe you'll want to edit out for time constraints, but I was reading about bronze birch borer, which is the same genus as the emerald ash borer. And that's native. It's a native pest here. It kills birch trees. And, where it's hot in Pennsylvania, like southern Pennsylvania, it will kill the white bark birch, and everybody plants the river birch that has resistance. So the European community is very concerned that our bronze birch borer gets to Europe, because the European types of birch are very susceptible. And if I say if, but probably when that happens, they're going to have a problem similar to what we had for the ash borer, the ash trees. So, I think it's interesting to realize that there are other potential scenarios like that on the horizon. And then try to educate people to not move the bronze birch borer in any living life stage to Europe.
Yeah. there was a researcher and professor at Ohio State. He's now with Davy Tree, named Dan Herms, and he did like a 20-year study of different types of birch trees and their resistance to our native bronze birch borer. And at the end of 20 years, the only trees left alive were our native birches. So that lack of co-evolutionary history, when the tree and the bug live together, they find a way to coexist. But when you bring European beeches over, or even some of the Asian beeches, at the end of 20 years, the only ones left were our paper birch, river birch, and maybe gray birch. Everything else was dead, all the non-native ones.
Well, I do find it interesting. And as I'm thinking about, how we can build resilience in our landscapes, and we focus a lot on native plants. As I've been learning more about the chestnut blight, which I believe was brought over from Japan in the early 20th century, where we had already established some Chinese chestnuts in the US, and the Chinese chestnuts were resistant because they are from that part of the world. And it just decimated the American chestnut. And now the breeding efforts use Chinese chestnut in breeding with American chestnut to try to get some of those resistant genes into a mostly, American chestnut genetic tree. But it's interesting to me that the so-called problem, which is like we're bringing these plants from other parts of the world that are bringing these diseases, is now also part of the solution, because we actually need the genes from those resistant exotic trees to build up a population of American chestnuts that has some of that resistance. So I just think that's been interesting for me to wrap my head around, is that, the problem can be part of the solution. I don't know. It doesn't work in all cases, obviously, but we might start having to think more about hybridization. And if we are going to continue to move plants around the world and encounter these issues, we might have to think outside the box of just, how do we protect our native ecosystems, but also how do we take some of that good genetic material from those resistant populations and get them in our own populations.
When you think about our warming climate, that throws a whole nother issue into the mix. I mean, it's not just these introduced pests, but forest ecologists are seeing, certain species like our white bark birch trees are moving further north into higher elevations, sugar maples, and so forth. And, in trying to create resilient landscapes that are going to perform over the long haul, I think we need to be, thinking outside the box and maybe using all male thornless cultivars of like Osage orange trees. They're tough. They're very tough. And the male trees don't make those horrible fruits that make a big shards. And of course, they're thornless, so they don't have the thorns. But, I think we're going to have to be looking at a much different plant palette than we have.
Yeah, I agree. I know landscapers in southeastern Pennsylvania are looking at trees that traditionally you think of as being well adapted to points a little bit south of us. So things like sweet gum, bald cypress, American holly, those things they all grow here, but they haven't been in the main palette of our landscape choices. But I think they're getting more and more prominent because of these changes.
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be interesting. And Margaret, you're the one who's going to be left here dealing with it all.
Yeah, well, I think I got some good ideas from our discussion today. So it's definitely something we'll keep thinking about, and something to keep talking about and throwing ideas around. And I think we could probably continue this conversation for a long time on this topic, but we're nearing the end of our episode, and which has been really wonderful and such a good chance to focus in on this one disease that's really devastating. And I think you're not alone, Emelie, in thinking beech trees are just some of the most wonderful trees in our region, and just feeling this deep sense of loss and sadness when you see how this disease is progressing. So I thank you so much for bringing your expertise. We always end our episodes the same way. We like to ask our guests what they like to do when they're not working. So we'd love to know, what do you do on your days off?
Well, I'm a worker, so I help on our family farm a lot. We have a greenhouse, and I've been spending every Saturday and Sunday for the last, I don't know, 8 weeks or so this spring, working in the greenhouse and selling plants to customers, helping my brother. It's fun for me to work with the family. You know, that's important. My niece helps, and some other family members. I like to walk a lot, and last year, you know, I have my phone in my pocket all the time, and I track my mileage, and I averaged 4.8 miles per day.
Nice.
And if you do the math times 365 miles, I hiked and walked the distance from Bangor, Maine to Miami, Florida last year.
Nice.
And I have a black lab, and he went with me just about every step of the way. So I like to do that. But while I'm doing that, I'm always looking at trees and plants and insects. And, you know, I'm looking at and taking pictures of things and thinking about things. And, you know, it's the time of my life when I get to process a lot of things, which is good. I try to not be texting while I'm walking. But I also do some just other things. I like to do wheel thrown stoneware pottery. That's another thing that's just like a creative outlet for me. And I hope to have time in my life to do more of that in the future. I'd like to get together with some other people that do pottery. I've kind of been working in an isolation for years. And I think I'd like to connect with some other, so I'll say artists. I'm calling them artists. Not necessarily me.
I mean, I've seen your work, Emelie, and you definitely are an artist. It's gorgeous.
So, well, thank you. I think, you know, I think pottery appeals to me because it's of the earth and it's practical. So, you know, there's reasons why I think I like it.
Yeah,
So,
that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, thank you again for being on the podcast. It's really special just to get a chance to spend an hour talking with fellow extension educators. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing what you know about these topics, and yeah, hanging out with us for the afternoon.
Yeah, well, it was fun to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Emelie.
Take care.